In this video, we're going to use some of the new JavaScript features I've been covering in my series, Learn JavaScript's Newest Features. I'm going to take the music box code from our Generative Music Box project on WickedlySmart and use some of those functions in the code. So if you've done the Generative Music Box project, or you might be interested in doing it, and you want to see how we use some of the new ECMAScript 6 JavaScript features now supported in browsers, then this video is for you. The Music Box project is a generative music application. So we've got a canvas in our page, and when we click on the canvas, we generate some graphics and some sound. And it just loops endlessly, creating some really nice sound. So that's the project, and first, we're going to take a look at how we can replace constructor functions with classes. And if you've seen my previous video on classes, you'll know what we're going to do. We're going to basically take some constructor functions and any methods that we add to the prototype and add them into classes. So if we take a look at the old Vue.js code, the Vue.js code you create if you build the project, then you'll see that we have a constructor function up here at the top. And then we have below that some methods that we're adding to the prototype. So we have the handle click method, the update display method, the draw circle method, and we add all of those methods to the prototype. So if we take a look at the code after I've modified it to use these new ECMAScript 6 features, you're going to see that we're now using a class. And don't worry too much about this module stuff up here. I'll be going over that in just a second. For now, focus on the class. And so what I've done here in the Vue.js code is I've modified the Vue constructor function, which used to just be a regular constructor function, and I've turned it into a class. And I've got a constructor piece here that takes the canvas, just like we did before. And then I've moved all of the prototype functions into that class. So handle click, update display, and draw circle are now functions that are inside that class. And so they are the prototype methods that get added to the Vue prototype. So that's actually a pretty easy change. Let's take a look at buffer loader, which is the code that actually loads the audio into the application. And so here again, if we take a look at the old buffer loader, you'll see that we had an old-fashioned constructor function and then added some methods to the prototype. And so what we've done here is, again, we've turned this into a class and then moved all of those methods into the class as prototype methods. So again, pretty easy. So that's how you move from using constructor functions to classes. All right, next, let's talk about modules. So the way that we built the Music Box project was already fairly modularized. We had several different files. We had an HTML file, a CSS file. We had our code split out into several different files. We had a musicbox.js file, and this was kind of the controller, if you're thinking in terms of model view controller. And then we had view.js, which is the view piece of the model view controller. And then we had bufferloader.js and audio.js. And bufferloader.js is the piece that actually loaded the audio sounds, which you can see here are these MP3 sounds that we're using in the app. And it loaded them into an audio context in audio.js, which you can see here. And we use those sounds, so we call the methods in audio to actually access and play those sounds. So it's already pretty well modularized. So moving it to using modules it's not really necessary, but I did that in the new version to kind of demonstrate how we would go through that process of using modules instead of just using script tags to import different scripts. So in the old version, I am using script tags to load in all of the JavaScript here at the bottom of the HTML. So I've got my body, I've got the canvas where we're going to be displaying the graphics, and then I've got these 4 script tags where I load in buffer loader, audio, view, and music box. In the new version, instead, we are just going to have a script tag for the main file, the controller file, musicbox.js. Now notice that we've got type equals module here. So that means that musicbox.js is now being treated as a module. And that means we can import and export to and from musicbox.js for the other modules that we're going to have in the system. So let's take a look first at musicbox.js. Now, musicbox.js is where we specify the onload handler function for the application. So this is the code that kicks everything off after the HTML has been loaded. And the first thing it does is it just loads the audio and then has a callback that handles what to do once that audio is finished loading, which is where we create the canvas, we create the view, and then we go ahead and start everything going. Now, this code needs the buffer loader, it needs the audio, and it needs the view because it uses all of those pieces. It references all of those pieces. So what we need to do is we need to import all 3 pieces into this module so that we can reference them. And because they're coming from different files, I am using 3 different import statements, and I'm loading one thing from each module. So that's musicbox.js. Let's take a look at buffer loader. And you can see here, in order to use modules, all I have to do for buffer loader is after I've converted this to a class, I just have to put the export keyword in front of the class. And that's it. I'm done. Everything is in this file is encapsulated inside the buffer loader class. That's easy. Let's take a look at view. Now, view also references the audio object down here when we call play. So I do need to import audio into the view code. Otherwise, the only change I need to make is to export the class view. And like the buffer loader, everything else in the file is encapsulated in that class. So again, an easy change. Now notice that we're importing audio here into 2 different places. We're importing it into the view and we're importing it into musicbox.js. Now you should know that with JavaScript modules, the JavaScript system treats each module as a singleton. So it's not like you're going to get 2 different instances of audio. You're going to get 1. So it's basically just a reference. And if you need more information about singletons and the Singleton pattern, then you can check out our online course on Design Patterns Bootcamp, or Head First Design Patterns, where we cover the Singleton pattern in depth. And I'll put some links to those in the show notes. All right, so that's the view. And then let's take a look at audio. Now, audio is not a class. It was just a variable, an object. So all we have to do is just put an export in front of this object, and we can export it out to the other modules. So that, again, that's easy. So changing this code to use JavaScript modules is pretty easy because it was already very modular. All right, let's next take a look at how I'm using let and const. So you might have noticed in audio.js, instead of using var audio equals, I'm using const audio equals. And I'm doing this because once I've assigned this object here to be the value for audio, I don't ever want to change that. So I can make it a const, and that ensures that nobody else is going to come along and change that. And otherwise, it's just like a variable. No big deal. Let's take a look at view.js. And you can see that here and there, I've replaced var with let. Oh, still got a var down here for alpha where I can use let. Now, if you're careful with your global variables, there I'm using const to set this as the value for view, and we'll come back and talk about this in just a minute. I'm also using it here for the context. Again, the context is not going to change. We only have one canvas, so the context won't change. But in general, as long as you're being careful about your global variables and you're being careful to declare your local variables, whether you use var or let, doesn't matter that much. You can go watch my other video on using let to see kind of the advantages or disadvantages of using let. So basically let and var are kind of interchangeable. Remember from the earlier video that let does create block scope. So if you want to take advantage of that, you can. But otherwise, in this particular example, whether we use var or let doesn't matter a huge amount. And I did the same thing in bufferloader.js. I just used let instead of var where it was appropriate, or const where it was appropriate. All right, next, arrow functions. Okay, so let's take a look at view.js. So one place where I did substitute an arrow function, actually, let's go look at view.js in the old version first, so you can see what we were doing. So previously what we were doing is we were passing a function, this function here, as the callback handler to set interval. So we're basically setting a timer to go off every view.loop rate, which is every 4 seconds, and then call this callback function, which basically just plays a sound. Now what I'm doing in the new version is I've just simply replaced that function with an arrow function. So you can see that arrow function here. Now in this particular case, it doesn't make any difference at all because we're not concerned about the value of this, and writing this function as an arrow function doesn't really save that much typing. If you've watched the previous video, then you'll remember that an arrow function is a pure function rather than a method. But other than that, in this particular case, it makes absolutely no difference whether you use an arrow function or a function. So in this case, it's just completely your choice. And I've done the same thing in bufferloader. I replaced a couple of the callbacks to use arrow functions instead of just regular functions. And again, in these particular cases, it doesn't make any difference. So it's just your preference. All right, that's it. We have officially upgraded our Music Box app to use the latest and greatest features in JavaScript. And if I go over here, so this is the ES6 version, and I load the Music Box function, works in exactly the same way with all of those ECMAScript features.